The Ohio State Buckeyes cruised past the Northwestern Wildcats, winning 31-7 in a scarlet and gray packed Wrigley Field, which felt a lot more like an Ohio State home game rather than a neutral site game or a Northwestern home game especially. But the Buckeye players came out and they looked disinterested. They were sloppy. They looked exhausted, tired, totally like they wished they were on a bye week, like Indiana is ahead of Ohio State versus Indiana, a top 5 matchup that I am very excited for that'll take place in Columbus. But looking at this game, and also against Purdue, it's been a common theme for the Ohio State Buckeyes to come out sloppy, to not play anywhere close to their A level, for the staff to put together a game plan that totally screams, let's score early, demoralize the Boilermakers and the Wildcats respectively, and get on out of here. And despite not putting forth anywhere close to an A-level performance, Ohio State looked better against Oregon and Penn State compared to both of these games, and also their game against Nebraska. Well, Ohio State won, and they didn't just win, they dominated. And over these past 2 games, Ohio State's outscored Purdue and Northwestern, who I know are bottom feeders in the Big Ten, but regardless, it's still impressive. They've outscored them 76-7. After surrendering a 7-0 lead, Ohio State outscored the Wildcats 31-0, and the final score could have been 38-7 if Will Howard just places that football a little bit differently to Jeremiah Smith in the end zone. I told you in the preview that Northwestern has a good run defense. I think we saw that in how at times they were winning up front against Ohio State. But Ohio State's skill position players are so good, especially Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, to where you can get them behind the line of scrimmage, but they can compensate for that. And the wide receivers, we have known for a while are elite, especially Jeremiah Smith, and it was also good to see Carnell Tate have another impressive performance. And Will Howard is getting better and better week over week over week. The offense was too much for Northwestern's defense, and even though the Wildcats came out with a game plan and I think believed that they could win, Ohio State, they won. They dominated and they game controlled. And I'm going to talk about a few takeaways that I have from this game for both teams here on College Football with Sam. But before we do that, I ask you to do 7 things for the channel, and they're all pretty quick. I ask you to score a touchdown for the channel, to score 7 points, if you may. And those points are as follows. Number 1, if you can subscribe to the channel, that's the most important thing. Number 2, please hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we release new content here. Thirdly, like the video to boost our presence in the algorithm. Fourth, comment down below your thoughts, your reaction, any takeaways that you had. You likely saw something that I didn't, and I love your input, so please comment down in the comment section. Fifth, share the video around to your friends, your other college football fans that you know. Sixth, join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. And 7th, this is the extra point. You don't have to do this because I appreciate all you did to score that touchdown for this channel. If you want to support the channel monetarily, check out our Patreon page and our merchandise store, and you can purchase items there via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment, or you can also send us a super chat down in the comments section below. Thank you very much, and let's get into these takeaways here, and first and foremost, do just a quick broad stroke brush through the statistics of this matchup. So Ohio State, they gained 7.2 yards per play. They were very explosive, particularly through the air, and as the game progressed, they began to wear down a Northwestern rushing defense that really impressed me in my mind. Ohio State had a points per play margin of 0.434. Northwestern, obviously, they had a points per play margin of negative 0.434. That means that Ohio State, for every one play they ran compared to every one play that Northwestern ran, the Buckeyes scored 0.434 more points per play. That's dominance right there. Even though they only won by 24 points and Northwestern covered the spread, which I predicted, although I've gotten a lot of other things wrong, and we'll talk about that both in this video and other videos, obviously, but that's one thing I got right. And even though Northwestern covered, the Buckeyes still owned. They dominated. And Northwestern only averaged 3.6 yards per play, which is not a winning strategy. Not against anyone. Even a MAC school. Even an FCS school. You score 3.6 yards per, or not score, but you gain 3.6 yards per play. You're not winning a thing, especially against an Ohio State team that leads the Big Ten in most power rating metrics, that's very efficient, that has talented athletes at every position. That's not happening. So Ohio State statistically dominated this game, both in yards per play, total yards, total points, and also points per play and points per play margin. You look at the turnovers here. Ohio State had 0. Northwestern had 1. Combined third down and fourth down conversions and attempts, Ohio State was 7 of 14. 2 of 3 on fourth down, and they were 5 of 11, I believe, on fourth down. About 50% both ways when you look at it, like combined. Northwestern, meanwhile, they were 8 of 20, and they did not have any explosive plays like Ohio State, so a lot of those conversions were made marching down, up and down the field in between the 20s, like what Tennessee did against Georgia, but at the end of the day, they couldn't punch it in when it mattered most. Both teams were low in penalties as well. Ohio State, 3 penalties, 32 yards. Northwestern, 2 penalties, 10 yards. So both of these teams, I think, played a relatively clean game. Northwestern just can't hit any explosives. They're very limited on offense, and their defense is good, but again, not great. Ohio State's defense is anywhere from near elite to elite. It's the same thing on offense, and they can make explosive plays anywhere on both sides of the football. I want to get into my Northwestern takeaways first, and then get into my Ohio State takeaways. For Northwestern, it was obvious they sold out after the bye. And I think they have a good coaching staff, and I think that David Braun is someone who does a good job of studying his opponents, dissecting them, and putting his team in the best possible position to win. And you have to do that if you're going to have any success at Northwestern, because they are very limited talent-wise. A lot of teams and coaching staff, sadly, and fans use certain excuses built in to explain why their programs are not good at winning football games. Well, Northwestern's a lot like Vanderbilt and Stanford in the way that what would typically be an excuse is actually a valid argument for why they are not consistently successful. They actually have legitimate academic constraints. And therefore, it's hard for them to get transfers. It's hard for them to get recruits. Northwestern is a school where I would not be shocked if they never came out of the dark ages in the current NIL and transfer portal setting. That wouldn't shock me if they were a non-top 25 team for the rest of my lifetime. It is kind of unlikely because of how many years it is assumed that I will live. I'm only 21, turning 22 in about a week. But regardless, Northwestern is not in a good place. They're not in the modern era of college football. They had 201 passing yards, 50 rushing yards. They averaged 5.6 yards per attempt, 1.7 yards per carry. And earlier in the game, they were averaging close to 10 yards per pass attempt and about 3, 4, 5 yards per carry. And they had 2 tackles for loss on the day. They could have had several more. I would say close to 6 or 7 if the hits they got on Henderson and Quinshon Judkins in the backfield actually landed. That shows, I think, how good Henderson and Judkins are. There were several times where Ohio State's offensive line caved on the interior, or they didn't fill their gaps properly. And Henderson and Quinshon Judkins did a good job of juking, of shifting, of shrugging off tacklers, and then turning what could be a 2, 3, or 4 yard TFL into a 3, 4, 5, or even 6 yard. There was even a play where it was a 10-yard gain after I think Henderson was nearly hit in the backfield. And Northwestern was competitive for a quarter, and if not for the fumble or the near fumble, because Northwestern recovered it, that happened on a third down, and then the punt that was a complete failure, just a complete screw job by Northwestern against themselves on special teams, maybe it could have been competitive for a half. So I have to give credit where it's due. They sold out after the bye and put on a very impressive performance relative to the team who they were playing against. And I was impressed with the Wildcat defense. I mean, they held Ohio State to 193 yards on 30 plays in the first half. Now, statistically and in the aggregate, that's not amazing, but you have to remember the talent difference here. And you have to remember the fact that they forced Ohio State to punt. They forced Ohio State to do some things that I don't think the Buckeyes wanted to do. It wasn't this total easy game for Ohio State. Again, at one point, it was 7-0. It was 0-0 in the first quarter. Ohio State, they could have pulled out their starters earlier in hindsight, in the long view. But ideally, Ohio State would have wanted to pull out their starters after halftime. This be a 28-0 game. Pull out your starters. Northwestern can't score more than 10 points anyway. And they couldn't do that. They couldn't. So this defense was able to limit Henderson, limit Judkins. I think they really challenged an Ohio State offensive line that is better than where it was for the second half against Oregon and against Nebraska, but still is a little bit shaky. And I don't know what to tell you. It could have easily been 14-7 or even potentially 14-14 at the half in favor of Northwestern, in the same way that it could have been 28-7, or maybe Ohio State has earned a shutout over Northwestern at the half. So it was an impressive performance by the Wildcat defense. They fought valiantly. They had poise. They did a lot of fundamentally correct things. There were some broken tackles, yes, but again, Ohio State's running backs are that good. And the fact that they were able to get penetration, they were able to be strong at the point of attack for as long as they were, was honestly, that was Big Ten good. That shows that Northwestern is still a Big Ten caliber team in a variety of ways. And that's cool. That's fun. That's great. I mean, we want all the Big Ten teams to be great, I would think, unless they're a rival of the school that you are a fan of, like Michigan to Ohio State to Michigan, Michigan and Michigan State to each other, Northwestern and Illinois to each other, so on and so on. But I was impressed with the effort that David Braun and that coaching staff and those players all put forth, especially from the defensive side of the football. Now let's get to Ohio State and then close out this video. I think that Ohio State was clearly uninterested, as we already talked about. Accordingly, there is not much that we can take away from this win. There just is not, because Ohio State lost by 1 point to Oregon. Every other game they have won. They're obviously, I think, looking ahead to that Indiana game. I think that was obvious against Purdue. It was obvious here. It's just business trip. It's simplified. Do what you can do. There's not a lot of exotic stuff going on, and when there is, it's not executed all that well. So, consequentially, yeah, I think we can conclude that Ohio State's been uninterested. They've been a little bit bored. They're kind of that one meme where this poorly drawn character just has a stick and he's poking at something and he's just do something. And they're kind of doing that to their schedule, I feel, where Purdue sucks. You're going to beat them by 50 points no matter what you do. So just go out and do what you got to do to win, and not much more. It's the same thing with Northwestern. The minute Ohio State scored 14 points, the game was basically over. And then when it was a 21-7 score at half, yeah, Ohio State's going to win. So there's not much we can take away from this, because it's not like you're Penn State, who has a weaker strength of schedule, and Penn State, they have to win out to get into the playoff. I think we can take a little bit more away from Penn State over Purdue compared to Ohio State over Purdue or Northwestern, because Ohio State's up there in the tier with Oregon. Penn State is not. Indiana, for now, because of their weak strength of schedule, I don't think is either in the terms of strength of record. But I think there are some takeaways that we can gather. And I think something that has impressed me a lot, and an area that I've been wrong on, especially early in the year, is Will Howard. Will Howard right now, he is not a generational quarterback. He is not an elite quarterback in the sense of Joe Burrow or Mac Jones in college, or Tua Tagovailoa, or Trevor Lawrence, or C.J. Stroud, or Bryce Young in 2021. I don't even know if he is as impressive as Stetson Bennett or J.J. McCarthy, because his receivers are 10 times better than anything Georgia or Michigan had those years. And for a quarterback and the numbers that he puts up, as Kyle McCord showed at Ohio State last season, wide receivers matter a whole lot more than practically any other position in general, especially when you're at Ohio State, where you're so talented that when Ohio State has a bad offensive line, it's good nationally, maybe average at the worst. It's just bad by Ohio State expectations. So Kyle McCord against everyone not named Michigan or Penn State or maybe Notre Dame is well protected. And he has Marvin Harrison Jr. in all of those games, who's a mismatch for everyone. So he statistically is a lot better at Ohio State than he is at Syracuse for those reasons. Regardless of all of that, because I think if you do take away like Jeremiah Smith or some other pieces, well, his statistics probably fall apart a bit. It's the same thing with like Drew Aller and Tyler Warren, for example. Tyler Warren's going to finish the year with 1,000 passing yards. He is Penn State's passing offense. It's the same thing. But regardless of all of that, Howard has been playing like one of the nation's best quarterbacks. He's 15 of 24 for 247 passing yards in this game. He made several great throws that were just in the window that only his receiver could get it. That was what the throw to Jeremiah Smith was. It was so low to the ground and yet catchable to where I can only assume that he expected Jeremiah Smith would adjust, kind of slide back into the end zone like he did, and catch it right there. That was intentional. The throw to G. Scott Jr. before the half, it was perfect. It was right over the Northwestern linebacker. It would have taken an All-American, first-round NFL linebacker who had crazy awareness to turn around and pick that ball off, or at least deflect it. That was an awesome throw. There's another throw to Jeremiah Smith, I think in the third quarter. It was that 50-yard reception that he had where he twisted his ankle at the end of the play. I didn't exactly see whether the Northwestern player intentionally twisted it or not. Sounds like he did. I didn't see that. Really what I cared about in that game is, wow, Jeremiah Smith just made another impressive play. He could be in the NFL right now if the rules allowed it. He is that good of a player. And Will Howard just delivered the ball perfectly. Ohio State averaged 16.5 yards per completion. That was Will Howard in this game. 2 touchdowns, 176.5 passer rating, and a 95.9 QBR. I mean, he's one of the best QBs in the country. And you look at his QBR right now, 85.3, that's fourth. It's slightly better than McCord's was last year. Not quite Stroud's of 21 and 22, but Stroud's a generational QB. No need to make that comparison. 181.9 passer rating. He hasn't used his legs as much this year as I would have expected. I mean, 63 carries, 122 yards. He's mostly been used in the red zone to get into the end zone, which Ohio State's been very good at, but also as the offensive line has slowly fallen apart throughout the season, and he also has the weapons he has at receiver, he doesn't need to use his legs as much. He just doesn't because of the receivers and playmakers that he has. He's improving every week. And that's a good sign if you're Ohio State, because the Will Howard of Kansas State, with the offensive line that Ohio State has, would not be capable of winning his team a title. He wouldn't. This Will Howard is capable of compensating for some issues on the team to help bring Ohio State home a national championship trophy. So take from that what you will. Last but not least, this is a point that I made earlier after the Penn State game. And it's a point that I think reigns true right now. Ohio State is just good enough to be number one. You look at Oregon. They were trailing 13-6 at one point on the road against Wisconsin. 16-13. You look at Georgia. They dominated Tennessee after the first quarter, but Ole Miss wrecked them. Alabama embarrassed them. And I don't care what the efficiency metrics say or what the more national channels say. Believe me, you'll help us get to be the best college football channel on YouTube. Trust me on that. We're already the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, and I thank you for that. But a lot of the national channels, I don't care what they say. Carson Beck is not a good quarterback. Someone who's already thrown 12 interceptions is not someone I can trust. Can't do it. I cannot do it. It's the same thing with Jalen Milroe last year. You're telling me to ignore Jalen Milroe's early games because Alabama's better in the previous 3 games. And then against Michigan, he falls apart, and it's like, like the side eye or like the JD Vance meme that went viral. It's like, well, I told you so. The statistics told you so. You just told us to ignore them. All of that being said, the point that I'm trying to make is Georgia has flaws. Oregon has flaws. Alabama has flaws. Tennessee has some serious flaws. I don't think that's a national title caliber team in Tennessee. Miami, their defense is outside the top 70 per ESPN in efficiency. Indiana, they're not as flawed as any of the teams I just listed in my mind, but they also haven't played a top 5 caliber team. Ohio State's really going to be their first test in that category. Ohio State has flaws too, but they don't have the same flaws that most of those teams I mentioned do. Ohio State's flaws, relative to the other teams, are few and far between. And they have a near elite to elite quarterback, an elite wide receiver room, an elite running back room. They have an elite safety room, the best safety room in the country. Their linebackers are getting better every week. Their defensive line's near elite to elite. And corner, while inconsistent, has elite talent. And the offensive line it's workable. It's not, I don't think it's great by Ohio State standards, but it's not bad either. And the way it played against Penn State is encouraging and should be encouraging. So they're just good enough to be number one. And I think that's, well, you should be happy with that if you're an Ohio State fan. They went on a 31-0 run after trailing 7-0 to Northwestern. They scored 0.534 points per play, which is just objectively insane. It's very good. It is 0.434 points per play margin. And they're an elite second half team. They shut out Northwestern in the second half. They limited Penn State in the second half. They shut out Oregon in the third quarter in that game where they played on the road against the Ducks. They shut out Purdue for the whole game. And despite being completely lethargic and lifeless on offense against Nebraska in the third quarter, their defense had that goal line stand against Nebraska and sacked them out of field goal range a few times. I mean, this is one of college football's best teams. And if you want to tell me that Ohio State's the best team in the country, I still think it's Oregon right now. I think Oregon, that game against Wisconsin on the road is more impressive than, let's say, what Ohio State did against Nebraska. And I think both of those games were the worst games in conference play that both teams played. And Oregon also beat Ohio State. I think Oregon has looked more physical than Ohio State. But if you want to tell me Ohio State's the better team and they would win if it was a neutral field, or they will win when they rematch in Indy, if you think they'll beat Indiana, I'm going to listen to you, because this team is really, really good. And they're one of the best teams in college football right now. And I think that Ryan Day is a strong argument to be the best head coach in college football right now. If you're not going to cancel him out for not winning a title, and you really just want to look at game management, the way Ohio State's managed their games, outside of that Oregon game, has been pretty impressive. And for much of that Oregon game, I thought they managed it properly as well. So Ohio State is just close enough to being elite, or just good enough to be number one. And that's encouraging. So to close out the video, really what I'm trying to say here in all these takeaways is that we can't take away too much, because Ohio State looked uninterested. They played a limited opponent. But there are some things that are reigning consistent throughout Ohio State's performances. The trench play on the O-line is a little bit lackey. It's a bit shaky. I don't know how it would hold up against Oregon or Penn State's D-lines in a rematch. I don't think it would match up well with Ole Miss's defensive line. Same thing with Georgia. But that's really the only weakness this team has, outside of maybe corner, where Denzel Burke did get toasted a little bit more in this game. To have those two weaknesses, where Georgia's offense sometimes is totally lifeless, where Ole Miss's offensive line, they are even less talented than OSU, and they don't have the same amount of talent or X-factor players overall. And we could go on and on and on. I mean, Penn State, they don't have any alien-like or even great wide receivers. Oregon, they're beginning to get banged up, and I don't think Dylan Gabriel, he may not have the same ceiling that Will Howard does. Oregon's defense isn't as good as Ohio State's is statistically, or when you look at performance. And there's just, so many things where Ohio State is good or great or near elite or elite and other teams aren't, to where this is a flawed team, but they may be the best team in college football right here and right now. My MVP for the game is quarterback Will Howard, 15 of 24 for 247 passing yards, 10.3 yards per attempt. He completes 62.5% of his throws and has a 95.9 QBR. Had a fantastic performance in this game, and I expect him to continue those performances throughout the season. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Connor OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Rodriguez, and Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Again, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell, comment, share, join the Discord server via the link in the description down below in the pinned comment. And also via the description or down below in the pinned comment, you can click on the links to sign up as a paid member of my Patreon page or purchase merchandise via my merchandise store. Go Wildcats and go Buckeyes. I'll see you all very soon.